6 folds is all it takes to create 729 layers of delicious puff pastry and these beautiful cinnamon, raspberry and apple worlds. It's also a great way of explaining why AI needs huge amounts of processing power, why we need those warehouses full of computers, and why you can't train a generative AI foundation model on your laptop. Welcome to Rose's AI, and welcome to Puff Pastry. We've already looked at the key ingredients in every machine learning AI system through the Yorkshire pudding, where we learned that every machine learning AI system needs data, algorithms and processing power. We then looked at one of those algorithms, a neural network, through the Victoria sandwich. We've looked at data through gingerbread biscuits and looked at how our AI systems can be biased in the patterns that they're able to recognise. We've looked at why learning is slow and needs to be slow, how we help our machine learning networks to learn through the sourdough starter, and we've looked at the importance of feedback loops through the jam roly-poly. Today, it's puff pastry, and if we look at these lovely cinnamon whirls, we can see the laminated layers of pastry. Let me just break this one apart, and you can see the lamination in this dough because it's been folded 6 times to create 729 layers. Now, this is very similar to our AI networks. So the simple butter dough layers and the folding means that what seems like a simple set of 6 folds can create 729 layers. And this exponential growth is similar to what happens with our AI networks. We start with a simple layer, but we build, and the systems grow exponentially and become so large that they need these supercomputers and they need these warehouses full of computers. Now, you'll often be told that AI is complex, but rarely do people explain exactly why the technology needs such enormous amounts of processing power. But through Puff Pastry, we will do precisely that today. Now, first we need to build our foundation. If we want to have these beautiful layers of lamination in the puff pastry, like we've got here, you can see it nicely on this bun, then we need to start with a foundation of dough. So in this mixer, I have got 150 grams of strong white bread flour, 150 grams of plain flour, a little bit of salt, 2 eggs beaten, and about 125 mils of water, but you need to judge it carefully to make sure you get the right texture in your dough. And so let's have a look. This one's just finished mixing and it's coming away from the dough hook really nicely. It's a little bit sticky, but if I put some flour on my board, just pop that down, I think it'll be absolutely fine. This is our base dough, this flour, egg, salt, water mix. Just like with our AI model, we start with a very simple layer. And what we need to do with this now is put it in the fridge for 30 minutes. So I'm going to put this in cling film and just rolled it in flour, just knead it a bit more, just to make sure that we're stretching out the dough, getting the gluten in the flour active. So knead it for about 5 to 10 minutes until you've got a smooth ball, and then pop that in the fridge. 30 minutes minimum, you could leave it there for an hour and it really wouldn't matter. But in addition to this base model that I'm going to put in the fridge, we also have 250 grams of good quality butter. Now I use unsalted butter, but obviously it's up to you what you do. Now, as with everything when making this kind of pastry, it's really important to keep everything cold. Even get your flour cold, because you want everything to be as cold as possible in order to build up the right layers in the pastry and to keep everything cold so that when it goes in the hot oven, you get loads of steam, we expand, and we get those lovely layers in the pastry. But we can think of this butter that we're going to add to our base dough as being adding dimensions in an AI model, adding parameters and connections, because it's the butter that will create the connections to the flour layers. So dough, butter, dough, butter, dough, butter, dough, butter. The butter's connecting the layers of dough. So we can think about this as the connections in our AI model. But this is where it gets a little bit complex when we get to the layers. And we'll look at that in just a moment. What we need to do with our butter is to bash it, literally. I do it between a couple of pieces of baking paper. And we need to get our butter really flat. You can bash it with a rolling pin to get it flat into about, for this quantity, my rolling pin is 40 centimetres. The butter needs to be bashed out to be about 40 centimetres long and about half that, about 20 centimetres wide. So we're going to bash it out until we get it into that shape. Right, so now we've got our butter. As you can see, we've got a very thin, oh, just coming apart there, a very thin layer of butter. Now this now needs to go in the fridge for at least half an hour, preferably an hour. So the thing with puff pastry is, it takes time. It's not complicated, it just takes time. A bit like building an AI system. So while the butter and the dough are chilling in the fridge, let's have a look at how we create those 729 layers out of 6 folds. And what this means in terms of understanding the size of our AI systems and why they need so much processing power. So in order to produce these lovely cinnamon, apple and raspberry buns, we need a pastry that has many, many layers, and we create those layers by folding the dough and sandwiching the butter between different folds of dough. And so what will happen is, we'll take the butter and the dough out of the fridge, put them together, we'll fold the dough over the butter, and then the butter and dough over the butter and dough. It'll make sense when you see it. But what I want to explain to you is how this is exponential growth, because it can seem quite confusing when you're doing it. So understand why just 6 folds create 729 layers. But if you understand the maths of exponential growth, then it becomes clearer. So the first folds we'll do will be 3, and then we'll put it in the fridge. Then we do 9, because we'll do 3 more folds, so it's 3 to the power of 3, which is 9. Then again, we put it in the fridge. Then after that second set of 3 folds, which created the 9 layers, we'll have 27 layers when we've folded that the 3 times. Then when we have 27 layers, and we again do the 3 folds, we get to 81 layers. Then we'll have 81 layers, again, we do the 3 folds, and we get to 243 layers, and then we take the 243 layers out of the fridge, do the 3 folds again, and that's how we get to that magic 729. So that's the exponential growth in my puff pastry. And this is the mathematical magic of our AI systems. It's not really magic, of course, it's maths. So now we've got the dough out of the fridge, it's nice and chilled, and we need to roll it out to be about 60 centimetres by 20 centimetres, so a third longer than our butter, which we rolled out to be 40 by 20 centimetres. Now got our dough rolled out to about 60 by 20. It's not entirely perfectly rectangular, but not too bad at all. And now we want to take our chilled butter, place it on the top 2/3 of the dough, making sure that not perfect, but we'll be fine. And then we fold over the bottom third of the dough to the butter. So now we've got 3 layers. We've got a layer of dough, a layer of butter, and a layer of dough. And now we're going to fold over top to bottom, so that now we've got dough, butter, dough, butter, dough. And then we're going to fold it one more time. Turn it round. So we've done 2 folds, and now we're going to do a 3rd fold that will create our 9 layers. And then we're going to pinch the edges of the dough to seal it up and pop it back in the fridge for another hour. So we have our dough from the fridge, and with the narrowest part facing towards us, we roll it out again to that 60 by 20 rectangle. We're going to take this to 60 by 20. It needs to go a little bit wider there. So here we've got the 9 layers. Now, remember, it's exponential. So we fold once, taking a third and brushing some of that excess flour off. So now we've got 9 plus 9 is 18. And then we're going to fold again. So we've got 9 plus 9 plus 9, so that's 27. So we're now starting to see that although we've only done 2 lots of folding, we've already got 27 layers. Now this is the kind of growth that in one of our large AI models would mean we'd got to the stage where we needed cloud computing. We would need cloud resources. Once again, we need to seal the dough and put it back in the fridge to rest for an hour. Why do we need to rest it? Well, we need to rest it so that we don't overwork the gluten in the flour. Now, in AI terms, we also need to rest systems because AIs can hit a computational wall, memory overflow, the processors can overheat, need to cool down, so need to rest. So both with pastry and building AI systems, we need to rest. And if we now look at this dough, so we've now got 27 layers, remember? So we started simple with those 9 layers where you could see each individual layer. And then you get to this level of 27 layers, we can't really see each individual layer anymore. And it's getting, in computational terms, getting to the stage where it's too complex to train on your laptop. You need some cloud computing resources. And now we're going to create 81 layers. So yet again, we're going to roll it out into that 60 by 20 rectangle, doing it gently so as to not overwork the pastry. And you can find that it starts to resist the more that we roll it. And again, that's similar to AI systems. You know, you can't actually keep on adding layers because each time you add a layer, you add a multiplicity of computational complexity. So there we go, pretty good rectangle there. So once again, we're going to fold the bottom third over. So that's 27 plus 27, so that's 54. Then we're going to fold over again to create those 81 layers of buttery puff pastry. And once again, I'm going to press down the edges together and put it in the fridge for an hour. Another hour in the fridge and we're ready to repeat that folding process again. So remember, we have 81 layers at the moment. So we're going to roll out the pastry again into that rectangle, always having the narrow edge facing towards us. Another rectangle, another set of folds. And this time we're going to do our 81 layers will become 243. It's getting harder to roll because the pastry is getting more and more layered. So 1/3 up. And so 81 and 81, that's 162 layers now. And up here, then we get 243 layers. Rid of all this excess flour. Now we're now at the stage where you would need some sophisticated graphics cards on your processors and a lot of cloud computing resource in AI terms once you've got to this level of exponential growth in the layers in your network. For us, we need to chill for one last time for an hour and then we'll do the final set of folds. We will have done 6 folds altogether and we'll have 729 layers. Another hour's rest and we're ready to do our final 6th set of folds. So once again, we roll out the dough into that rectangle. It's getting harder and harder to do this. We've got lots of chilled layers of butter dough, butter dough, butter dough. Right size, I don't want to overwork it too much, otherwise we'll end up with a tough pastry and we want a nice light flake in the pastry. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. Let's just brush off that excess flour. So 243 doubled, and then the third one, 729 layers of butter dough, butter dough, butter dough to create some beautiful puff pastry. And I'm going to pinch the edges again. And now I'm actually going to chill it in the fridge overnight. And then it'll be ready to use. I've already made those lovely cinnamon, raspberry, apple swirls. So I think I'm going to use this batch to make a lovely salmon en croûte. Our pastry is now resting overnight and we'll bake it tomorrow. And what will happen when we bake it? Well, we'll bake at 220 degrees centigrade, which is hot. And what will happen is that the water in the butter will expand and push the layers of dough apart so that we get that lovely flaky effect from the pastry. So the cooking adds dimensionality. So we see dimensions that we couldn't see in a single layer when we first started working with that dough. And it's true with our AI systems as well, that as they grow, as we use them, we see added dimensionality and we see properties emerging that we couldn't have seen in the individual layers from which they were created. And it's interesting, isn't it? It's all about exponential growth. So how our 3 initial folds became 729. And that's true with our computing networks as well. And as we add dimensions, we add enormous amounts of complexity. If you just think about this, we often call it the curse of dimensionality. If we have 10 data points in one dimension, that's relatively simple and easy to understand. 10 data points in 2 dimensions, 100 data points. Again, we can understand it. But if you get to 10 data points to the power of 100 in 100 dimensions, well, the answer's got more noughts than I can fit on my board, and in actual fact, it's more atoms than exist in the universe. So adding layers adds enormous amounts of complexity to our computing. So with AI, as with puff pastry, we need to get the number of layers precisely right. Too many and we risk the system collapsing, something we call vanishing gradients. If we don't keep the pastry cool enough or the network stable enough, then we can get the mix of the butter and dough together so that we don't get those lovely layers in the pastry. And in terms of our AI, this would be what happens when we have what we call a parameter collapse. So, as I say, with both AI and pastry, getting the layers right is really important. So there are 729 layers of deliciousness in these nice raspberry, apple and cinnamon whirls. But it took hours. The time in between the folding of the pastry, the overnight chilling. It took refrigeration. It took precision. It took perfection in terms of the timing. Remember the episode on chocolate where precision and perfection were fundamental. And this is exactly the same as complex AI systems. If you take something like ChatGPT-4, that took 1.7 trillion parameters, 6 months to train, 25,000 processing units, massive cooling systems and over $100 million of cost. So each time we add a layer to a system, it adds huge amounts of complexity because of the principles of exponential growth. So, as always, it's useful to have 3 things to take away from this episode of Rose's AI. The first one is to understand that AI grows exponentially, and what can start off as something quite simple and understandable can become complex and unwieldy very quickly. Second, appreciate the computational brilliance of the systems that we have. They give us answers in seconds, despite having to compute across trillions of parameters. And thirdly, know the limits. It's not always the case that adding more parameters, increasing the size will lead to better systems. It might create a monster that's unwieldy and not effective. So, these systems can escalate fast because of the added complexity. Each layer multiplies the complexity in the system. And it's important to remember that just as with pastry, we get this lovely emergent, flaky property from the pastry as the water in the butter expands when we bake it. We get emergent properties from our AI systems, sometimes properties that we weren't anticipating. We can't always see exactly what the end product will be like by looking at a single layer. This is Rose's AI, and I hope you've learnt something about AI systems through baking beautiful puff pastry. And remember, exponential growth in pastry and in AI systems can create magic, and it can create monsters.